Thank you all for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues relating to public transport. And what we're going to talk about, this week is uh, the issue is with the meta issue that I keep talking about a lot about learning from other places. Except normally I talk about how places that are behind, which when it comes to public transportation include the United States, should be learning from places that are at the global frontier of the tech, which in public transit is predominantly Europe and East Asia. And we're not going to do it this time. We're going to do a variant, which is not the Greek letter variant for Corona, but rather a variant on the theme of learning from other places, which is what the frontier can learn from itself, or more precisely, what different frontier places can learn from one another. Because it's always difficult to tell a place that perceives itself to be at the top of the world that they should learn the knowledge of other places. It's difficult. It often means acquiring a new language. It means communicating in a different culture, which can be the most petty things ever. I mean, so the example is that coming from Israel and then from math academia and then reading math academia, these are both very informal cultures. Uh, One of the things you learn in math academia is you start grad school. Let's say you start grad school at a very prestigious place. Um, you're going to have professors in the department who are legends in the field. Some of them have field medals. Some of them maybe didn't. I mean, most didn't. Obviously, even if you're going to Harvard or MIT or something, but many of them would be considered short for fields at one point. You call them by first name. Like the correct way to refer to my PhD advisor is Shawu. And it's something that you're supposed to understand by, let's say, second year of grad school. I bring this up because it makes it difficult for me to communicate with German people specifically because in Germany the culture is a lot more formal. Whereas again in North America and Scandinavia it's more informal. It's easier that way. So again, it's just acquiring a new culture, and again that's hard for the people. That's more effort, and it's something that is much easier for a culture that perceives itself as having some kind of social or economic inferiority. So it's much easier for, let's say, the third world to learn from the first. Or within the first world, it's much easier for places that self-perceive as periphery to learn from what they perceive as the core. So Italy has been learning a lot from Germany. Spain has been learning a lot from Germany. Turkey has been learning a lot from Italy, because if you're in Turkey, you think of Italy as part of European modernity. You don't think of Italy as, oh my God, these people are all unemployed, which is what you think about Italy if you're German. And likewise, if you're Korea, you're learning from Japan, but it's, I think, much less likely to happen in the other direction. Often the small learn from the big, even at equal levels of development or similar levels of development. So when Germany developed the intercity system, so that would be the intercity trains of Germany. Let me see if I can find this. Intercity train, Germany, 1971. Yeah. Okay. So when Germany started developing its category of express intercity trains that were designed around clock face schedules that originally 2 hours, but the strongest corridors were hourly, or maybe two lines running 2 hourly uh, with a with an intercalation, so that chord segments would be every hour, or that simply like. So here's an example of the kind of network. Sorry, let me move my face. So here's an example of this kind of network where so this was West Germany. So a chord segment like Frankfurt would have more service, and then the connections would be timed sometimes, so that you would be able to have connections between city pairs that are hourly. So that's a German invention. It's an invention that other places did not do. Japan leapfrogged that, going directly to high-speed rail, essentially. And the and the result is that even though Japan has an immaculately timed rail network, uh, it does not do these kind of time connections. It does time things. It does time overtakes. So the most important tool for understanding Japan is called Hyperdia or I do not, I never know how this is pronounced. Warner, can you help? I pronounce it Hyperdia, but I'm pretty sure that this is bullshit. Pseudo-Latin strats. It could be either Hyperdia or Hyperdia. I do not know. The point is that uh, whatever you call this website lets you get precise timetables station to station anywhere in Japan. So if I, for example, want to go between Tachikawa and Shinjuku, so Tachikawa is one of the most important suburban train stations. Hypadaya? Okay, thank you. Uh, where's the downstep? One um, because Japanese has this kind of weird stress, right, with the downstep. So is it Hyperdaya or Hyperkaya? So anyway, one of the most important suburban stations within Tokyo, uh, legally within Tokyo, except it's not really within what everyone perceives as the city. It's just the prefecture. People who do not know how Tokyo works. So this is the prefecture. As you can see, this is not city. City is the eastern third or so of the prefecture. It's called the 23 special wards. It's here. And then the rest of the metropolitan areas, suburbs that are within the prefecture, called Kama. Then the prefectures of Kanagawa, Chiba, and Saitama. Also, it's Haipadaya. Okay. So this, even though it's legally within Tokyo Prefecture, it is never perceived as the city. It is never analyzed in government statistics as the city. Yes, it has the same regional government as the city, but the city and the city does not have and the city does not have its own city government because each ward has its own separate government. But at the end of the day, a lot of urban things that you think of as municipal are actually run by the national government in Japan, so that's not as big a deal. But anyway, this is the suburbs. Now, this is dense suburbia, don't get me wrong, but it is suburbia. One of the most important stations is called Tachikawa, and it's the branch point on the shoreline. So this is Chuo, and this is a branch called Ome. And the point is that all the express trains on the Chuo line stop at Tachikawa. Then at a station called Kokubunji, and then many keep expressing with very few stops all the way to Shinjuku. So let's look. Today's Saturday, I want a weekday. Let's do weekday afternoon. Uh, so interval timetable. So the thing is, I don't care about the 12:18 versus the 12:07 versus the 12:20 whatever. The trains come so often, I just get on the first one, right? So interval timetable helps me just see how frequent this is throughout the day, starting from Tachikawa, ending in Shinjuku. Uh, so I said noon, right? So let's look. First of all, you might notice that there are 15 trains an hour off peak. As I said, one of the most important suburban stations, a branch point, and it's Tokyo, not a small city like Berlin. And so Japan absolutely times, it absolutely times overtakes. So I want to point people to these two trains, the special rapid and the normal rapids. By the way, they're called rapids because they go past Mitaka. Um, so Mitaka inward are four tracks, two local, two express. This is just the express track. So the normal rapids are just the trains that make all of the stops on the rapid tracks, and then the specials are things that make fewer stops on these tracks. So it's two tracks, and we have the special rapid, which departs inbound 12:02, 4 minutes behind the local, the normal rapid. And I want people to look at something. So here at Tachikawa, we on the special rapid are a couple minutes behind the local, and here at the next station, which is Kokubenji, we are a couple minutes ahead. Normally, it takes 2 minutes to get from Nishikokubenji to Kokubenji, but did I lose my cursor? Yes, I did. So normally it's 2 minutes to get from here, which is Nishikokubenji, to here, which is Kokubenji. But here this is 7 minutes. Why is it 7 minutes? Because the train dwells for a long period of time at Kokubenji. Oh, looks like 5 minutes, right? 2 minutes versus 7, or maybe 3 minutes if it's 5 at this overtake. So the point is that the the point is that at Kokubenji, which you would think is where the same railway line, JR connects to the Musashino line, but now it's actually Nishikokubunji, where the Musashino line hits. This is because I guess the Musashino line was not an important passenger line, it was just a freight bypass when the system was set up. And then in Kokubunji, there are more tracks, right? You can see there are more tracks in Kokubunji. And remember, it's the line that is not four tracks here. It only gets four tracks local and express east of Mitaka, and we're way west of Mitaka. So this is a two-track line. You can even see the mergers. So here we have a vanilla two-track line, Jura Rapid, and now it branches out, and now it extends out to four tracks, so that here we can have express trains and local trains interchange passengers, and then the local is going to dwell and the express is going to overtake it. So this is something that Japan does all the time. Not on literally every line, it's only on very important lines that require a careful weave of local and express trains. These, by the way, include the Shinkansen. So the Shinkansen has the same system. It's two tracks. There are the normal high-speed trains, the local high-speed trains, if you want to call them, the way the Kodama, where the trains make all the stops, and then at local stops, they're being timed to dwell for, let's say, 6 or 7 minutes, so that an express train will just overtake them. So this is an example of this happening on a regional line rather than an intercity line. This is something that is a very important way of running local and express service without having to build four tracks everywhere, because four tracks are expensive. So does Japan do this? Absolutely. It does this more than anywhere else that I know of. I'm sure that there are examples of this happening in Germany and in Switzerland, but there aren't as many. We just don't have as many dense lines that do this. Usually here, when we have lines that have, remember, we said 15 trains an hour. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 15 trains an hour inbound, and this is off-peak. And if you want to throw away the expresses, let's say you don't care just about Tachikawa, but also the intermediate stations, you throw these away, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to be thrown away. Okay, 9 trains an hour. Just to explain, just that you guys get what Tachikawa is, Um, I mean, I'd say, oh, it's the suburbs, but what does it mean to be in the suburbs? This is by straight line 32 kilometers out of central Tokyo. You do 32 kilometers out of Berlin, and I think you might, and I don't think the line's even on every 10 minutes. I think the outer limit of 10-minute service here is, again, we're a smaller city, would probably think be 20-ish kilometers. Right, so let's go for, so the center of our system, that would be Söderstadt, so here. Um, and outermost extent is going to be Strausberg. So just to put this in perspective, Tachikawa, the station where uh, the local trains run at worst every maybe 8 or 9 minutes off peak, that's about the same distance as the outermost reaches of the Berlin S-Bahn. Um, and maybe they want to do some extensions, but not past that. I mean, the extensions are from Spandau, which is much closer in, because of east-west wall bullshit. So my point is that Japan absolutely owns on things like timed overtakes, and this is something that other places need to learn. Again, Germany does it a little bit, as does Switzerland. I don't think they do it as much, and certainly not at this throughput. I don't think they do this when you have 15 trains an hour. I think that I mean I don't know if they even do it when there are 12 trains an hour on a line, which is probably the optimum for this kind of service. For this kind of expresses overtaking locals. And I'm going to get into talk schedules that Japan doesn't really do in a moment. Probably the optimum would be, first of all, not probably, definitely, first of all, because of symmetry issues, you definitely want to be in a position where the local and the express timetables are the same frequency, which here there aren't. Here we have 9 local, 6 expresses, and that does create certain artifacts of where is the train being overtaken. Because essentially the problem is that the complexity of this infrastructure is coming from the higher of the 2 frequencies. So if you can schedule 9 locals and 6 expresses, you can also schedule 9 locals and 9 expresses with the same difficulty, give or take. From experimental things that they've been mostly working on with American examples, but shouldn't be too different elsewhere. Probably the sweet spot for this kind of thing is either 4-4 or 6-6. So either local every 10 minutes, express every 10 minutes, or local every 15, express every 15. Again, this is more frequent than this because Tokyo is a vast city and therefore it needs more. But I would not laugh at them if they wanted to 4-track all the way to Tachikawa, whereas at 4-4, I would laugh at it if it tried to 4-track, or at 6-6. So whereas Japan does these timed overtakes, what we here do in Northern Europe better is timed transfers, which are an artifact of having lower frequency. You don't want or don't care about time transfers when everything runs very frequently. So if the trains run every, let's say, 5 minutes, you care to some extent, but not really. If they run every 3 minutes, it's bullshit, you don't even try. In Berlin, actually, we have a timed cross-platform transfer between the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn. So it's not even regional rail, it's regional rail interacting with non-regional rail, so it's here. It's Kastorf. You can kind of see, right? This is the U-Bahn, this is the S-Bahn. And so, right, so this is not Karlsruhe, I keep forgetting the name. This is Wuppertal. So Karlsruhe is there, Wuppertal is the station. The U-Bahn runs at this point every 10 minutes. So the inner core runs every 5, but I'm forgetting past 1, maybe past Vortal. They only run every 10 minutes. And this far east, also the S-bound is just one branch because all the other branches have already branched off. It also runs every 10 minutes. So the way this works is that we have 4 tracks. Um, you can kind of see them through the flying functions. So to S-Bahn, to U-Bahn, and the trains in each direction are matched. So you don't get the time transfer into the wrong direction. So if you're trying to do whoop, whoop, or whoop, whoop, or whoop, whoop, tough luck. But if you're trying to do from the U-Bahn, so from Huno, here and then to the S-Bahn, it's a zero penalty transfer. Or other way around, from here, so from suburbs from the suburbs, and you maybe wanted to go to the U-Bahn or something. Let's say to get to this part of to this part of what I want to call Lichtenberg, but it's not really Lichtenberg. Or over here to Frankfurt Allee, you're also in luck. Yeah. So in Germany, it's more freight, but I mean that's not the issue. I mean, so the timed overtakes can be done. There are enough lines here that are entirely passenger lines that could be doing more timed overtakes, I think. Various urban S-Bahn lines is probably the main use case. And the Regionalbahn lines that want to be S-Bahn lines. The point is that you probably don't want to do timed overtakes like this if you don't run very frequently. So there's a reason why Tokyo is the capital of this, which is that in Tokyo, yeah, okay, 40% of the trains from Tachikawa to Shinjuku don't make local stops, but that's fine because it means that the local stops still get 9 trains an hour. Now, if you try to do it in, I don't know, Mannheim, where each S-Bahn service runs every hour, then what does it mean? It means that some stations are only going to get to stop every 2 hours? No. Or even every hour with some kind of overlay? No. You want you want base frequency. You want every 10 and every 15 minutes at this distance from city center. So and then if you need more, okay, yeah, then you do expresses, which is why, as I said, the sweet spot for this is is 2 service patterns each every 15 minutes or 2 each every 10 minutes. If it's too frequent, then they're just going to run into each other, and it's not going to be very reliable. And again, let's look at the schedule for a moment. You see that there kind of aren't these overtakes at rush hour because it's too difficult to do it when it's every 2 minutes. So yeah, whereas if it's too infrequent, then you are just wasting frequency. But again, but again, we have big cities in Germany. I mean, not Tokyo big, but München, for example, probably should be thinking about doing something like this more. I think Zurich already does things like this. But again, what we're better at is the timed connections. So not the overtakes, but the connections, which come from so so this old network, or even the newer rendition, certainly the refinement to this network by smaller countries that looked up to Germany, like the Netherlands or Switzerland or Austria, that just did this, but better, with more integrated planning. So after this came up, Switzerland changed its Switzerland changed its timetables so that trains would arrive at Zürich Hauptbahnhof just before the hour and depart Zürich Hauptbahnhof just after the hour. And the result was just easier to connect. And then they refined the system so that it would be like this at multiple major cities, and that required also planning the timetables so that they would be able to make these various connections, these various knoten, these knots or nodes, however you want to call them in English. This is not something that Japan does. Now, we can trace why Japan did not develop this, whereas Switzerland did. And just as timed overtakes are ideal for a high frequency solution, timed connections are always better when you're doing when the frequency is not so high. So at volatile, so at volatile, it's every 10 minutes. With this distance from city center, 10 minutes is not amazing, but it's okay. So volatile by straight line, it actually that's when it's decently straight here. It's 13 kilometers. 10 minutes, I mean, ideally it should be 5 minutes and not 10, but I mean, 10 is not going to murder your ridership. Um, so that's a kind of sweet spot for these kind of uh, timed transfers. Or also in Berlin, U-Bahn, we have Mehringdamm. So where the U6 and U7 used to branch and no longer branch are separate lines now, but they meet cross platform. And during the daytime, it's every 5 minutes and it's not timed. In the evening on weekends, it's every 10 minutes and it is timed. Again, same direction. So if you're trying to go Neukölln to Tempelhof, you don't just take the ring. But if you're trying to go Neukölln to Mitte, which is the main connection direction, it's timed. If you're trying to go Tempelhof to random places in Charlottenburg, that's also timed, but that's a lot less important and way fewer people do that. So we have these time transfers, which are really good, and we have these timed overtakes, which are very good. And ideally, you want to employ both very liberally. Japan does not do time transfers very much. The planning, the schedule planning in Japan doesn't really employ that kind of system. The Shinkansen, uh, the Shinkansen lines don't really have places where they meet. I mean, there's Tokyo for the lines north of Tokyo and south of Tokyo, but um, they they're run by separate companies. I don't know to what extent they're integrating to the sense to the extent that it's easy to go to connect. I don't know Sendai to I don't even know where. So either Sendai to Shinosaka or Sendai to a random Kodama only stop. And so this is an example of timetabling where the kind of Germany. I won't say it's the German way, but Germany started doing this, and then Switzerland made it a lot better, and only now is Germany slowly learning from Switzerland with the Deutschlandtakt. Again, it's a size artifact. It's not a wealth artifact. Germany is poorer than Switzerland. Everyone in Germany knows that Switzerland is a richer country than Germany. But it's not. But it's not like we're Italy to Switzerland, let alone an actual third world country. So the size issue kind of trumps. And so the learning is much easier in this direction than in this direction, unfortunately. And again, it's I have a lot of suspicion with South Korea and Taiwan, South Korea versus Japan. Yeah, the freight is integrated, but Japan has about 8 freight. So the passenger trains are what needs better integration, I think, in Japan. And the uh, situation and so again, there are things that Japan should be learning from Korea. I can't explain exactly what because a lot of it boils down to construction costs. South Korean construction costs are very low. Japanese construction costs are not low. They're actually some of the, in theory, they're very high, but in practice, Japan has such austerity. So here's another thing Japan needs to learn from, not just Europe, but literally anywhere. In Japan, as a kind of budgetary austerity, the state will not fund the construction of a subway unless it can expect to not just be operationally profitable, which is pretty normal in Asia, but also pay back construction costs within 30 years. So that's a 3.333 whatever percent rate of return. That is not the rate of return within the Japanese economy. Um, Japan is an old country, like a demographically old country with low growth prospects. Uh, big institutional concerns borrow at a lot less than 3.3% real. I think the payback time for the Chuo Shinkansen is supposed to be, I think, 60 years, maybe 50 years. So they're saying that they're only going to retire the loans in 2097. They are borrowing them right now for a line that's expected to open, I think, late 20s parts of it, and then mid 30s the rest of it. So yeah, 60 to 70 years payback period. And this is JR Central, which is not public. It is I mean, it's public in the sense of publicly traded, but it is a private sector firm. It may be a private sector firm that has a kind of Geithner put on it, where people invested in figuring that the risk is limited because the Japanese state will not let JR Central go under. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the Japanese state is not going to wipe the shareholders if it needs to do a takeover. So it's just a large Japanese concern how much it can, at what rate it can borrow, and it's not 3.3%, it's more like 1.5%, because this is kind of the natural rate of interest in Japan right now. And so what they need to do is they need to just invest better. And by invest better, I mean invest more. And this actually connects with high Japanese construction costs. Now, why would you think that high construction costs come from underinvestment? So there are two reasons. The first is a common excuse that I hear from Americans. I said I'm not going to talk about the United States, but I kind of have to right now. One of the excuses I hear from the United States is that it doesn't build much, so it doesn't have a lot of experience building, and this is why costs are high. This is bullshit. Generally, costs rise over time, so the first line that a place builds is cheap, and then things get more expensive over time. And it certainly would not be the case in a place that used to build but has slowed down often because construction costs rose and then it slowed down, like New York in the middle of the 20th century or Tokyo early 21st. But there's I think a bigger reason why austerity in this case might raise construction costs, which is that it raises construction costs per kilometer, because if you have austerity, that only the strongest lines are going to be built, right? Because the government is not, I mean, I won't say the government is not doling lines based on political favors. I mean, it absolutely is doling lines based on political favors, but the 30-year payback rule is very neutral. And what this means is that an urban subway will only be built if it's the strongest possible line. Generally, the strongest possible lines are not the cheapest per kilometer. That's a really important distinction. And as I say, this is someone who mostly researches cost per kilometer. Often, the correlation between cost per kilometer and cost per rider, which is what matters for profitability, is not strong, and it might even be negative. Obviously, if you're more efficient, then you'll be better at both. But keeping efficiency constant, so same place, let's call this place Japan. The lines that have higher cost per kilometer are likely to be city center lines, the things that are being built. So for example, Sotetsu, which is one of the private lines in Yokohama, is building some tunnels around, so not quite city center, but tunnels that would let it connect to Tokyo. Lines that would let it connect its Yokohama-based system into Tokyo. There are two different phases. One is going to connect it to the Tokyo network, and the other to the JR network, I believe. So that's a complex regional construction having to deal with older tunnels. So that may be a little more expensive per kilometer relative to the fact that the line isn't even in Tokyo. But because it's essentially a regional connection, leveraging a lot of existing infrastructure, maybe the cost per rider is actually lower. And likewise, in Osaka, I know they're building a through-city commuter line, and it's the same thing. So you build the most annoying and most expensive things per kilometer, but because you're building through city center, that's where the ridership is highest. That's where the demand is highest. That's where the trains are the most overcrowded. Um, Maybe the cost per rider is going to be a little bit less than if you were to build a subway line all the way into lower density places. And so now, now I'm not thinking this is a strong negative correlation. I think that there is to some extent sometimes a negative correlation, especially when certainly as soon as you have differential levels of efficiency, this starts mattering. So obvious, so the correlation, if you're comparing, I don't know, Japan and Korea, is going to be, oh, Korea is more efficient, so has lower cost per rider and cost per kilometer. But maybe within Japan or within Korea, it's different. Again, to some extent. So in Japan, even though the costs of what's being built in Japan are very high per kilometer, they're building only the most difficult things because um, complete subway lines, which in most places would pencil, because maybe they're not expected to be profitable, or maybe they are, but the expected social rate of return is decent and they don't demand 30-year payback. Maybe they would just build the entire thing and not just one small segment of it. So this is something that Japan needs to learn from literally the rest of the entire rest of the developed world, as far as I can tell. And this even includes Korea, which does not have bright demographic prospects either, or Southern Europe, same thing. Um, and if anything, Japan maybe has slightly better demographic prospects than Italy because Japan uh, is Japan. Japan can have immigration if it wants. I mean, who is Japan competing with for immigrants? I mean, countries that are very far away, like the United States, but they're far away, and maybe the kind of immigrants that would be easy to integrate in Japan, like let's say people from the Philippines or Vietnam or Indonesia, would just have too hard a time entering America. So what is Japan competing with? Korea. But remember, Korea is small. Korea can't fill all of the immigration needs from people in uh, middle and lower middle income Asian countries. Uh, Taiwan is even smaller. Singapore is very wealthy, but tiny. Now compare this with Italy. Um, Italy does not have bright migration prospects because if I'm an immigrant, I want to work, right? Remember, Italy is a mixture of the Turkish stereotypes and the German stereotypes, right? So the Turkish stereotypes are part of are a very sophisticated society, part of European modernity. The German stereotypes are all of them are unemployed, and it's a mix. I'm not even in the north-south sense, but it's a mix. It's really both. If I'm an immigrant, why do I go to Italy? I mean, if I can go to Italy, I can go to Germany, right? I mean, there are all these artificial rules that the EU made up that were never there before about requiring immigrants or asylum seekers to apply for asylum in the first EU country that they go to. In other words, making sure that they apply for asylum in Greece or in Italy where there are no jobs for them, rather than in Germany where there are many jobs for them. But that's just hostile environment bullshit. And it's not like Italy is friendlier to immigration than Germany, quite to the contrary. So Italy does not maybe have the ability to demographically grow through further immigration because Germany is right there. We're richer than Italy. We're bigger. It's not like Japan, where literally the only Asian countries that are bigger than Japan are what? Indonesia, which is rather poor, China, which is rather poor, and India, which is by Japanese standards hideously poor. Okay, and let's also add Bangladesh and Pakistan, which are also hideously poor. So, so if anything, uh, Japan. So if building new subway lines is good enough for Milan and Rome, it absolutely ought to be good enough for Tokyo and Osaka. So this is again something that Japan is not doing right that it should be learning. And again, it's not an Asia versus Europe thing because Seoul absolutely is building, even though the growth prospects, I don't even know if they're better than in Tokyo. The fact that the infrastructure costs in Korea are much lower than in Japan helps growth in Seoul a lot. But again, if you think about in terms of immigration, um, South Korea is probably in the same basket as Japan at this point. And so the so if Seoul is doing something, it's probably rational for Turkey to do the same. And so Seoul is building a lot of subway extensions and a lot of regional extensions right now. Um, so um, so here's an example. So again, Taiwan is not Taiwan. Japan is a frontier country when it comes to railways, absolutely, but it needs to learn to actually build more from literally anywhere else. Um, then there's the timetabling issue where we don't do, I think, enough timed overtakes. And this is something that we could be learning from Tokyo, how to do better. Uh, and this is especially true when you have subway lines that don't run terribly frequently. So our subway lines run every 5 minutes. Can you do timed overtakes 10 times? Maybe. I don't know if the U-Bahn is very good for this, but it's something that planners should keep at the back of their mind. Ditto things on the S-Bahn. Um, Another really useful thing that I think Berlin needs to be learning, and I don't even know from where. I mean, Tokyo is one of many places that do that, but the same is true of London, for example. Again, it's not Europe versus Asia; it's something a lot more modeled. So the Stadtbahn, the central east-west trunk line on the S-Bahn here, uh, it is this line. It's not a very fast line. You might be able to tell. Let me see if I can uh, toggle the layers so that so you can actually see the railway. Okay, so I do have transportation. I have no idea where they did weird things that they didn't uh, show, where they're no longer showing the railway as a line because they used to. But something rather important is that this line is not very fast. I think it's 60 kilometers an hour for the most part, because you can kind of see the squiggles. So all of this is very squiggly, following the curves of the road. It's because they had difficulty acquiring property to build the line as straight as they would have liked. So this is the Stadtbahn through city center. Um, Uh, this is this is the center of the S-Bahn network. It's called Friedrichstraße. It's the main east-west to north-south connection point. The north-south is it's a tunnel from the 30s that goes like this. And then this is the other north-south connection point, Hauptbahnhof. The north-south lines here are not S-Bahn, they're intercity. And then the line keeps undulating on its way through Snowtown, City West, Charlottenburg. And so this is 4 tracks, the Stadtbahn. 2 tracks are dedicated to the S-Bahn, 2 tracks are everything else, which includes intercity and regional trains. The S-Bahn runs very frequently. The regional trains don't. And I don't mean just that the individual lines don't. The regional trains here are not intended to be frequent because the frequent urban service is S-Bahn. The regional trains are about connecting Berlin with faraway places. So the busiest of them is RE1, Regional Express 1, which connects Berlin. Uh, I believe every hour it goes as far as Brandenburg, i.e. the original Brandenburg that the province is named after, that the state is named after. Uh, and then in the other direction it goes to Frankfurt an der Oder, and then half the trains uh, go even farther west from Brandenburg to Magdeburg, and then from Frankfurt an der Oder, they don't go east into Poland. They kind of fold, and then they end up going to Cottbus. So the and by the way, half an hour from Berlin to Frankfurt an der Oder, every half an hour from Berlin to Brandenburg, that's not awful frequency given the sizes of the cities, given the distance. I mean, Berlin to Brandenburg is 60 kilometers. half an hour is pretty decent frequency. Ditto Berlin to Frankfurt, 80, not even 60. But there are a bunch of lines. So this is one of them already. There are a bunch more that around the Stadtbahn. I believe there are six, but they don't arrange themselves on the Stadtbahn in a good way for frequent service. So it's not like I can stand at Westkreuz or something and then, or maybe if the train's on top of Westkreuz at Charlottenburg and then have faster service on these trains uh, from Charlottenburg to, I don't know, Ostbahnhof or Ostkreuz. The trains are not arranged this way, and this is, I think, a bad thing that Berlin needs to be fixing. Um, so there are the intercity trains that are in between, but honestly, the intercity trains should be running on the faster line. Remember, the Stadtbahn is a very slow system. The only reason to use it on intercity trains is if you're trying to get to Ostbahnhof, which is not connected to very much, and then more importantly, uh, run through to the rail yards here. So it's mostly about yard access here and nothing more. So what they probably should be doing is moving all of the intercities. So instead of entering the city from, let's say, Spandau and then through the Stadtbahn, like this, what they should be doing is probably still entering west from Spandau, but there are tracks that let the trains do this. And then they'll go like this. This is a segment of the ring that is designed for faster service and for intercities, and then for north-south into into Hauptbahnhof. So this is something Berlin probably wants to be doing. So making sure that the trains enter city, that the intercity trains enter the city station via the faster route, which is something that France also did when it did a certain TGV realignment. I'll show you guys on this map. It is Kauto RER. There's this really cool website called Kauto Metro that has these track maps of the original use case is the RER, but also many other systems, mostly but not only in France. So because it's mostly RER, they're not as intent on showing you TGV service, but here, this is Gare de Lyon. And they're showing us in color the RER lines, but they're also showing us in black the intercity lines. Also use Gare de Lyon, which after all, Gare de Lyon is the busiest intercity train station in Paris. I'm not sure it's the busiest in Europe. There might be busier ones in Germany, maybe even Zurich might be more, just because it goes in all directions. This only goes in one direction. But there are 30 million high-speed rail passengers at this station, so it's not easy to beat. And so again, black is the non-RER trains, and they will show you how originally they went on this line, but they're showing us Paris area TGV lines. This is one of them. It opened in the 1990s it was intended to be a bypass around Paris that lets you get from this line, which is LGV Sud-Est, so that's Paris Lyon. Then this is Paris to points north, and this was a bypass that lets you get from points north, let's say Lille, through the airport and also through Euro Disney to points south, that is to say Lyon. But they also built this connection, so now they managed to realign. So they managed to use disused tracks plus a little bit of a greenfield connection to realign Paris-Lyon to not use the slow lines as much, but stay fast for a little bit longer. It saved a couple of minutes. And this is something that Germany, to some extent, is doing. I'm not saying, oh, this is a rickety railroad that needs to be upgraded that you don't know exists. No. There are trains that do this. Does it go Spandau, Ring, North Ring, and then Hauptbahnhof. And I think the plans in the Deutschland talk are to do that more. So that these plans are welcome, and I just think they need to be doing that even more, to the point of using these disused uh, tracks, because there are 4 north-south tracks through Hauptbahnhof right now. They're expanding to 6 for something called S21, which is another S-Bahn route. So it's going to be still 4 for intercity trains and a handful of regional trains through here. So lots and lots and lots and lots of spare capacity, because right now I think it's only 6 trains an hour use these 4 tunnel tracks in each direction, but still, it's not 6 times 4, it's 6 times 2. And so they should absolutely be using this much more intensely in order to leave space, in order to create space on the Stadtbahn for on the 2 non-S-Bahn tracks of the Stadtbahn for regional trains that overlie to have a frequent trunk on the Stadtbahn, which is again, it's something. So this kind of S-Bahnization, let's call it the S-Bahnization of regional rail. Now, if you're American, it's going to fry your brain, because in the United States, reformers use the expression regional rail and S-Bahn interchangeably. What I mean specifically is S-Bahn is urban, regional, and Regionalbahn is things that connect Berlin to cities at the size, independence, and distance of Brandenburg, Magdeburg, Frankfurt an der Oder, Cottbus. If you want to be more adventurous, you can even go as far as Görlitz. I think there's actually I think there might actually be a Regional Express from Berlin all the way to Görlitz. I'm not sure. There are definitely a bunch of things that go well north, and I don't mean Neuruppin, I mean, or Abelswalde, I mean these two, but also Neustrelitz, Stralsund, and maybe even Rostock. But Stralsund, I know, I think RE3 goes Berlin, Stralsund. Stralsund. So making sure that they, as far as possible, the ones that have some kind of east-west components, maybe not Berlin Stralsund, but certainly ones that go east-west-ish, don't just act as intercity lines, but also work to have some kind of urban and suburban component where you could use them, where when a bunch of them come together on the Stadtbahn or near the Stadtbahn, you can use them more frequently, which again, it's something that London does, it's something that Tokyo absolutely does on things like the Tokaido Main Line. I mean, the Tokaido Main Line runs decently frequently from Tokyo, I think, all the way to Odawara. So this again, it's a thing that Germany needs to be learning. And note that I'm spending so much time talking about things that are purely just about scheduling and how the trains run, just because it's one of so many aspects. Of course, there's also all this stuff about construction costs, where places that are otherwise doing pretty decently, like France and Germany, probably need to figure out what Scandinavia is doing and what Southern Europe is doing that lets them build subways for less than half the costs of us at this point. And maybe not less than half, maybe Germany maybe has the same kind of austerity problem as Japan to some extent. Not as bad, but also pretty bad by European standards, where, again, maybe the costs per kilometer here are higher because we only build really difficult things, because the easier things that would have lower costs per kilometer are more suburban, and then maybe they're not being built because people think that trams are equally good, or people just don't care. I've ranted in this video series many, many, many times about the unwillingness of Berlin to extend U8, to extend the U8 subway from its terminus, which is here at Wittenau, here to Märkisches Viertel. Look at the land use at Wittenau. It's not terrible or anything, but it's still mostly houses. Yeah, a couple of apartment buildings, but mostly houses. Where they did the intensive construction, it's Märkisches Viertel, which is here, and you can see here it's bigger buildings. Maybe you can't see how tall they are over here, but they're pretty tall. The Märkisches Viertel area actually has about the same density as the inner neighborhoods, which is and this is not an inner neighborhood at all. You can also see that it has horrific parking craters. The urbanism in Märkisches Viertel is not very nice. So the buildings themselves, at least from the outside, look pretty. But there's nothing like the community centers and the kind of walkable paths that exist uh, in Mägisches southern twin, which is Skopje, which does have a subway connection. Um, so this is my cone, it's not my cone, this is my cone. So this is Skopje, and this did get U7. Um, and the and so Mägisches is also like that modernist towers in the park type development, rather working class. Uh, and it does not get a subway. It's 2 stops from the terminus of the subway. They have been promised to get a subway for 50 years, so they very slowly extended U8 up to Vita now, and now they keep bumping the decision to keep building this because it's too, I don't even know what to say. I don't want to say too bourgeois because this neighborhood is not bourgeois. Too boring or something. So maybe because they're not building this would not be an expensive line per kilometer because look at the land use. I mean, so U8 comes under here. So U8 would go until under this under this street, Wilhelmsloedam. They probably are not going to build it cut and cover, even though they can build cut and cover if they want. So it's going to be a short boring system, which is by itself not hard. Probably a stop somewhere around here. It's very wide door. The station can be built cut and cover. That's not going to be a problem. And then maybe a terminus somewhere within the development, and maybe they would also need to stage a tunnel boring machine somewhere here. But look at all these parking craters. There's ample space for staging here, and so this is not going to be difficult. But it's not being built for silly reasons. The things that are remember we have in by the way we have decent cost estimates for this. It's not terribly expensive. I think it's supposed to be 170-ish million euros per kilometer at this point. So maybe the stuff that's being built is just the most difficult things because under advancement in infrastructure. But even then, I mean, this is 170. I mean, in Italy, this would not cost 170. In Italy, something this easy would not be 100. So Italy averages a little more than 100, but Italy averages a little more than 100 is a combo of easy things and hard things. So the little more than 100 in Italy also includes things like Rome Metro B2. Uh, where is Rome Metro Line B2? I will not be able to find it on a map, even though I have read quite a lot about the construction of this line. It is not the most expensive or the cheapest in Rome. It's just a line that's somehow the most, I think, comparable to non-Italian things because so here's another thing that people can be learning from each other. There's a specifically Italian way of construction, which is you build which is at this point driverless metros are a mature tech. So you build driverless trains. You build the driverless trains with top of the line signal system, which at this point it's plug and play. It's like saying, oh, I have a top of the line phone system. It's a Samsung or it's an iPhone or it's a Pixel or it's Sony Xperia. I mean, you understand that these things, I mean, they're pretty nice tech, but it's consumer tech. You can buy it. It's not hard. And it's the same at this point with driverless tech on new metros. So they use these driverless signal systems to run at extraordinarily high frequency, often every 75 seconds, 85, 90 seconds. Brescia even does 67. And because of that, they can shrink the trains if they don't need a ton of capacity, which they don't because remember how I keep mocking cities for not being very large in a discussion about Tokyo? These are not very large cities. Okay, Brescia, I think the metro area of Brescia is 1 million people. So the trains in Brescia are 40 meters long because they don't need to be longer because 40 meters times the train every 67 seconds is the capacity that Brescia needs. And maybe in Milan they do slightly bigger trains. And a huge cost saver because they can shrink the footprint of the stations, and stations are rather expensive if they're very big. I believe at this point they're 500-ish euros, maybe even a little more if you're in city center, maybe even 1,000 euros per cubic meter of dig. So if you're doing very big stations, like let's call them New York size or Tokyo size, let's say 180 is New York, 200 is a bunch of Tokyo, so let's say 200. And let's say you're going rather deep, so 20 meters, and let's say 25 meters, so it's 100,000. 100 million euros per station is not cheap. I mean, 50 million is okay, but you'd rather go less. And the whole point of the Brescia system is that it's not 200 or 150 or whatever, it's 40. So they just figure out how to under-engineer the system, which is something that smaller cities should be doing. Copenhagen, unfortunately, is the only one that did it, and Copenhagen bundled it into about, I don't want to say 8 different things, but a bunch of different things that make it the most expensive in Scandinavia. Essentially, they kind of privatized the system a little bit. They got too clever with financing. They did a lot of they did design build, they did land value capture, all those things that Anglo people like as a way of avoiding having taxes on the books, and then they just lead to very high costs because there's no cost control. And so the situation is that in Rome, at least, they don't use that system very much. Why do they not use that system? Because line B was intended as a regional line and took over an old regional line, so they could not do very small trains. So B2 is the only extension in Italy that's on our list of specific cases that is very large train, very large, 150 meters. And even then, the costs are not high. And the reason, but I mean, they're not very low, but they're not very high, and the reason, and they are, so it's under one of these three tiers that developed in the 19th century. I want to say it's this one, but I'm not sure. Developed in the 19th century, yeah, it is this. Libya. Libya subway station, yeah. Let's throw away hyperdie right now. This is the main V, this is B2, the extension, yeah, so Libya is part of it. Yep. So, this is pretty dense. Okay, I mean, the land use here. I mean, look at these buildings. This is a wide street, but it's not a street that you can do literally anything you want under. These are Euro blocks that are rather tall. The building here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 floors. So on the tall side for Europe, and these are enclosing Euro blocks, right? So it's not tower in the park. So this is not terribly easy geography. I mean, it's also not terribly awful. It's not. I mean, this is 19th century part of Rome. These are, you can see that these are modern buildings. Not modern as in 20 years ago, but modern as in at the time that they were built, there were factories and there were coal plants. This might actually be nice enough. It might be more modern than that. As opposed to, uh, let's say, parts of line C here that are being built here. There, you won't see them because they're under construction. But I think you can figure out that building over here, when this building was being built, yeah, the main form of wealth was owning lots and lots and lots and lots of slaves from, I don't even know what exact century it's from, so I can't remember which people Rome was genociding or mass enslaving at the time. These are a bunch of Roman ruins. This is from the Imperial Forum. So you can probably kind of guess that here it's maybe a little bit more complex to build because you do not want to uh, make you don't want any risk to ancient monuments ever. Uh, so the costs here maybe are higher, whereas here, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's a building from. I mean, at the time this building existed, these buildings were built. Italy existed, so maybe the standards for building subsidence here aren't quite as strict as over here. So the point is that this is a kind of comparable example to very dense urban lines. And even then, the costs here are probably about half what it is in Germany. Um, and likewise, suburb to suburb, the costs are also about half. So this is something that Germany absolutely has to learn from Italy. Also has to learn from the Nordic countries, but I think at this point, Southern Europe is better than the Nordic countries. The Nordic countries have had a cost explosion. Recently, there were big cost overruns from very low levels, but still big overruns in both Stockholm and Helsinki. Oh, really? The Colosseum is from the Imperial era? For some reason, I thought the Colosseum was built in the late Republican era. Okay, yeah. Okay, so so at the time that I guess at the time that the Colosseum was built, most of the wealth of Rome was not in factories, but in owning lots and lots and lots of Jewish slaves who, for some reason, thought that they could rebel against Rome and not be murdered slash enslaved. I mean, you do the same thing over and over and expect different results. No, just no. Um, so the so anyway, the point is that in Italy we see first of all willingness to learn, but that's a very meta thing. I mean, at specific object level, Italy figured out how to do bureaucratic legalism, and this is also true of Spain. And to some extent, it has been exported to Latin America, where the uh, system is very different from American adversarialism in that if you try to sue the government because of some environmental impact, you will be told that the state's environmental protection bureaucracy has deemed the project good or not, and if the project is not deemed good, the environmental protection agencies will figure out how to make it better. And it's the same with, let's say, monument protection in Italy. They're very strict, but there are no private sector laws whatsoever. In Spain, you have a 2 month comment period. You have 2 months to say that you object to a line and why. That's all. In Germany, you have 2 months to say that you object, but you do not have to say why. So, in the first 2 months, you say I will object later, and then you take a year to make up reasons why this is not the line that should be built. Because what about people who live in rural areas, and what about them, and why is high-speed rail not serving a village of 800 people who are very comfortable? Just never ask what their parents and grandparents did in the war. And and in Southern Europe, that just does not exist. In Southern Europe, it's much less adversarial. It's much more bureaucratic and top down. Um, the Nordic countries are top down, but in a different way because there's actually a lot more negotiation. But the idea that you do like individual level objections, no, you don't. I mean, a union raises objections. Maybe a municipality raises objections, and if it raises objections, it's like, okay, no, that way for you. Whereas the much more individualized system of adversarial legalism of the US especially, and also to some extent the UK or even to some extent Germany, that's just not a thing. Anywhere that I know has low cost. Maybe it's a thing in Korea, but I doubt it. I genuinely doubt it. And So this is something that Germany absolutely needs to learn. Uh, or France. France doesn't quite do that. France is very top down. Retail level objections are extra legal, i.e., throwing rocks. So yeah, they need to probably suppress the rock throwing, which is doing a lot of damage to the country for things they're not just or not mostly infrastructure. For infrastructure, they can be bought off. They buy them off with 30% extra um, payments for takings. Uh, and in France, they also figured out how to do land swaps for farmers. So if the high-speed line is splitting farms, they will land swap the farms so that they don't need to uh, cross the high-speed line, so they don't need to build undercrossings, so it's cheaper. And so it's all these adaptations to various problems. In this case, the problem is that white people in France are allowed to riot. Um, People of color in France are not allowed to riot. White people are, and this big problem with a lot of French self-perceptions, which is that they essentially surrender to rioters on most matters. Not all of them. So on vaccines, Macron actually held the line. But on the lockdowns, France did not lock down as early as it needed to in the second wave because of rioting. Um, and the fuel tax that they tried to pass on diesel, again, they canceled it because of racist rioting. So a lot of things that France needs to do about environmental protection, about corona protection, about again, vaccination is the exception to what we're doing, about not locking 30% of French GDP and welfare that is largely not well targeted, but it's too pension-y. So a bunch of things were or too many subsidies, but that's been uploaded to the EU to very inefficient farming, um, where everyone in France understands what needs to be done, but none of them has the guts to actually tell rioters, "You're not uh, sovereign. The state is sovereign. Go away." And uh, and again, it's not as big a deal in infrastructure. It's a bigger deal in other things. With infrastructure, it's much easier to deal with rioters. It's actually much hard. It's actually somehow harder to deal with, like what Germany has, which is not this kind of working class um, antisocial behavior, but middle class antisocial behavior. So instead of rock throwers, uh, we have a couple of these too, but instead of rock throwers for vaccination, we have doctors who will lodge abductions or anthroposophic skulls that act as petri dishes for literally everything. And lawyers who will make up reasons why the Cold Gazette is going to ban mandatory vaccinations for some reason. And yes, yes, yes. Just ban rocks. Yeah. So, have you seen a European sidewalk? Like, have you seen how a sidewalk looks here? Because they're cobblestones. You come in with a kitchen knife and dig a little bit around the edge, and this is your rock. And then once you've got one, it's much easier to set loose the others. Um, the it's not even remarkable if there's a stone missing. It might not even be vandalism. Huh. Okay. In Berlin, there are streets that are cobbled. Um, so yeah. By the way, in Berlin, we don't even have big rock thrower problems. I mean, yeah, we have a few. It's still Berlin, but um, I think people understand the occasional squat that objects to paying rent on general principle are a bunch of morons, whereas in France they're treated as part of the as almost like I don't want to say fourth estate, more like the second estate, because the entire government is really one estate. It's not they don't do this thing of like making the government hate itself thing that the United States does. Uh, but the or the pretense that it hates itself really. It's mostly just people looking for excuses not to do anything. Um, the police disagrees with what? With the fact that the rock throwers are a bunch of morons nobody cares about? Because um, so evidently they're shutting down Cuppy despite the riot threats. Now I live near Cuppy, and the rioting is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and by ridiculous I don't mean terrible. I mean it's a joke. They don't actually do anything. Um, Again, in Paris, again, I shouldn't say in Paris. The writers don't live in Paris. The writers live outside Paris if we hate the city identity, and then they come to Paris to throw rocks. Again, with infrastructure, it's not as important. The bigger French problems with infrastructure are that the is it SNCF is at this point led by airline brain people. So going back for a moment, Berlin, Hamburg, and Leipzig are centers of German violent leftist protesters. Oh yeah, yeah. I actually happened to be in Leipzig. A couple weeks ago, there was I think it was on the 6th of November. It would have been Saturday, so that would have been yeah, it would have to have been the 6th of November. There was a Querdenker protest, and this being Leipzig and not, I don't know, Chemnitz or something, they were outnumbered by Antifa. And I actually happened to be having dinner while the Antifa march passed near us. So here's what they were doing. I think they were drumming or something and yelling something antifascista over and over. And me and the person that I was having dinner with, we were saying that, I mean, if you were not having dinner, we'd probably be marching with them. And other than the fact that they were wearing ridiculous masks, like not actual balaclavas, not normie bourgeois thing. We just have a medical mask covering your face, but something in between. Other than that, I mean, like you call that violence? Um, the stores didn't even board. The stores were all open, and in between, and the stores were all the start not quite Christmas, but pre-Christmas things were all open. What violent protesters are you talking about? Berlin, yeah, okay. In Berlin, yes, there's Kirby. There are a bunch of other squats that genuinely believe that rent is violence. Uh, I think in Neukölln at one point they broke windows. Um, Something important. They're all white people. Because usually when Germans think about violence in Neukölln, they don't think about white people. Uh, Someone once pushed a burning shopping cart in the direction of a police officer. Okay. Doesn't CDU have like important things to do? Like, didn't they like run the country for 16 years or something? They have more important things to worry about than someone mildly disrespecting a cop. I mean, okay. Yeah, so in France, it's much more working class antisocial behavior. Here, it's much more middle class antisocial behavior. In neither case is this sovereign in any way, shape, or form. It's just that they surrender an infrastructure here much more than in France. In France, the problem is something different. In France, the problem is the French elite understands that France has problems. It misdiagnoses the problems because if you're so this is the example they keep worrying about the Americanization of Europe. It goes like this: in the core parts of Europe, which do include France, they don't include maybe Southern Europe, but Southern Europe looks up to Germany, so it's not as relevant. So in the core parts of Europe, so Northern Europe, France, and so on, our living standards are basically the same as in the United States. I mean, some things are better there, some things are better here. From time to time, you will hear an American pundit hilariously talk about how in Europe we're all poor because because we have a different heating system and they don't like it, or we have a different or something dryers or something. And then I mentioned the opposite things, and the Americans explain to me why they're not important. That we have more insulated windows or something. Again, basically the same thing. The differences mostly exist for people to mock each other on social media. But we have less inequality. So here's what it means. Okay, it means that if you're a working class German, your living standards are way better than average working class American. I have to emphasize average because in the United States, inequality is within social professional classes and not just between them. So there are people in America who ID as working class who have $70,000 trucks, uh, but ID as working class because maybe they're small business owners who did not go to college because they inherited the business. Maybe they're maybe they are a labor aristocracy. They got one of the few high-paying manufacturing or trades jobs. Again, often it involves family connections, but not always. The Sandhogs, by the way, New York, they get paid a lot, and that's family and ethnic connections. They won't let you in if you're just a random schlub off the street. The wages are too high. So because there are people who are working class by ID but are actually pretty rich by money, they will say, "Oh, the working class in America is better off." No, it's not. The average working class person in America don't doesn't earn that. So on net, working class in Germany way better off than in America. Middle class is basically the same. So middle class, for the benefit of any Americans who have wandered into here, means middle class. In America, it means something different, which is not homeless. I mean it in the normal way. So in the rich country like Germany or the US, let's say top 30-ish% of the income distribution minus the top 1 or 2%. That's probably the middle class. And then if you're the top 1 or 2%, then you're way better off in America than here. Even like bottom of ninth decile, in theory, you earn more income in America. It's just that then you maybe want your children to attend college, or maybe maybe the professional job that lets you earn that income means that you're paying New York City rent, or San Francisco rent, or Boston rent. So on net, on net, it's essentially the same for professionals. But if you're top maybe 5%, definitely top 2% or so, even net of having to pay insane coastal rents in America, you're better off than you are here. So the French elite, for example, understands that there's also so I mean the Parisian elite is not insular. People think they're insular, they're not. They constantly compare themselves with things west of them, that is to say London and New York. They constantly do this. Parisians vacation in America all the time. I mean, Europeans in general vacation in America all the time. I mean, do you think the only people who go to Disney, to Euro Disney, are American domestic tourists? No. It's such a thing that in Florida, the biggest in Florida, the biggest I don't know what the biggest uh, hospitality peak is, because the people that I talked to were not hospitality, they were retail. The biggest retail peak is, as you might expect, the Christmas season, so from Black Friday on to just before Christmas. But there's actually a secondary retail peak, driven entirely by European tourists in the summer. And then that might even be the hospitality peak. I'm not sure. Because you have the beach, you have Euro Disney, you have Euros with 5 or 6 weeks of paid vacation. By tradition, these are to be taken mostly in July and or August. So yeah, French people don't actually hate Britain or the U.S. I mean, diplomatically, there's a lot of sniping involved, but th- th- that's that's a lot of it is diplomatic bullshit. So they actually look at London and New York constantly, and if you're a CEO of a French company, you know that there are CEOs of British companies and they earn more than you do, and you want to have what they have. Now, one possibility is to increase French economic productivity, which is very hard because French economic productivity is almost as high as American, and I think higher than British. Actually, OECD GDP per hour worked. Um, I do not want your index, assholes. Okay, I want US dollars. Okay. Okay, Ireland is a fake number because most of it is because the GDP is corporate profits that are not earned in country. Luxembourg is also kind of a fake number because of commuters. Okay, Norway, okay, they have oil, and now okay, Switzerland, that's the first real one. US, very high. Let's do 19 and not 20 because of weird issues with okay, Sweden is basically the same as the United States. The Netherlands, not as good. Austria, what's this? Germany, Iceland, G7 here, Finland, UK. France is not below the UK, is it? Where? Highlighted countries. So I want to do G7. So let's highlight Germany, France, UK, Italy, Sweden for good measure, US. Okay. So France is better than Germany actually. At this point, the US is clear, but that's again it's 2020, where a lot of it is who got furloughed. Um, but even in 20, why are you showing me? Okay, so 2018, because I can't hover over 2019. Oh, I can. 79.65 in France. Oh my God, why are they like this? Okay, so France and Germany, the point is, the per capita productivity here is essentially the same as in the United States. We're like 7% behind. We're a little bit ahead of Britain, maybe 10% ahead of Britain. Um, we're a frontier country. I mean, Germany, and the same is true of France. I mean, they can do a little bit, but and they should do a little, and they should do things like have more flexible labor issues. But first of all, if they try to do that, people throw rocks, and second, and more importantly, that's mostly going to increase productivity at the bottom, not the top. So essentially, if you're the French top 1% and you want the living standards of not Parisian elite but London elite or New York elite, the only thing you can do is increase inequality. Now, as it happens, French inequality has not risen at all in the last 40 years. Um, so at this point, France has, by global standards, pretty low inequality because um, it started at kind of moderate rates and it stayed at kind of moderate rates, as opposed to, let's say, Sweden, which started at communist rates 40 years ago and is now at moderate left rates. Um, and so the situation is that they keep trying to do these bullshit privatization of the state ideas that they get from Britain and the US. And specifically, it means things like having a generic business elite take over the government rather than a civil service. Um, so this is where you're getting the SNCF airline brain. Instead of saying this is a railroad, it should be run with people whose experience is in the railroad. If things don't work, we can look for other people with experience in the railroad, like for example DB, like for example Renfe, like for example Trenitalia, like for example SBB. If we don't want to be snobbish and only learn from big countries, they don't do this. They instead invite Air France people. So the and these are not people who understand railways very well. These are people who invent ideas about railways that are essentially just a matter of assuming that people have the same behavior as airline behavior there, and this is terrible because what ends up happening is that they uncritically buy things like the 3 hour limit. So it's something that I do not know if there's a very good model for this, unfortunately, and practice only I know some from the literature, but not from practice, where people need to understand that high-speed rail ridership is a continuous graph, not contiguous, continuous graph of time, which looks roughly like this. Um, so what I mean is it's always concave up. It doesn't go to infinity at zero time because there's always access egress time, but there's no breakpoint. It's not like so in Germany, people believe that the breakpoint is 4 hours, which is yeah. And in France, people believe the breakpoint is 3 hours, which is especially bullshit. So there's this kind of belief in France that high-speed rail is not really effective beyond 3 hours, and they keep seeing all the evidence of the contrary, and they still believe it. In Germany, it's 4 hours. So the idea is that in Germany, they try to get as many steady pairs down to 4 hours, and not try to get the 4 hours ones down below 4 hours because 4 hours is good enough. And in France, it's the same thing with 3 hours, and that leads to some god awful planning. In France, again, it's worse with how they think of 3 hours as the limit. Essentially, it's a bunch of airline execs who think, oh, I would not take the train, I would fly if it were 3.5 hours. So everyone acts exactly like me, and let's not look at all the evidence that says that between Paris and Toulon, which is 4 hours, the TGV has something like a 59% model split versus the airlines. Um, I'm pretty sure the 50-50 point is not even 4 hours, it might even be 4.5 hours. Um, it depends at that point on things like how close the airport is to a city center. In Japan, for example, at 5 hours, it's Tokyo Fukuoka. Model split is 92% air, 8% rail, but I think that's partly Japanese airlines being relatively easy to use, and partly inter-island stuff, and partly I think the Fukuoka airport is just much closer to city centers than, let's say, in Hiroshima. Um, so the point is that in France, they're learning from the wrong people, in this case, the UK, US, with the setting of a generic elite rather than the more professional civil service, subject matter expertise, common in France as well, but increasingly just in places that are not France, because France thinks that if you went to then everyone else should be your slave. Um, yeah, and maybe they throw rocks, but the rocks are never thrown at the NLs. They're thrown at Jews and queers and people of color. Um, and so now, as you can imagine, France exerts a lot of soft power in the parts of Europe that don't look down on it, just as Germany does, just as the US does. So the airline mentality kind of infects Renfa as well, although Renfa is, I think, understanding that they're having problems with the operations that are trying to fix them to have a more regular timetable. So there will be something like an hourly talk that they need to do, or on the stronger airlines, half hourly talk or even more. That's a German thing that France needs to learn. France is only doing that to some extent and only on a handful of regional lines. You can see TACT E things in Paris, but it's not as regular as in Berlin. You can see TACT E things in the Riviera, but first of all, the trains are never on time. But second, even then, again, not as regular as what you would see in Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, Switzerland. Um, Czechia, by the way, has a train TACT. There's something that I don't know if Pony is here. Um, Pony sometimes comments here. Um, that he pointed out that in Poland the trains are on throw darts at the wall and see what sticks kind of timetabling, and in Czechia they try to put them on a clock face timetable. So there's supposed to be a clock face 2 hour train from the Polish border here to Prague, and the train in Poland at one point gets to the station, I think it's to Novi Bohumin, I'm not sure. Not even to not Ostrava, I'd say it's farther out. Um, and it gets there and it gets there an hour off at one point. So it ends up so because they want to put everything in the 2 hour slot in Czechia, they just make the train sit at the border station and in the border city for an hour, so that it would fit into the 2 hour takt of the Czech trains. So yes, it's kind of a little Czechia story, but it's even more a little Poland story, a little PKP. So this is something that, in this case, PKP needs to be learning from Germany and from Czechia. I don't think Sweden is very takty. Let me actually check this, but I'm pretty sure the last time I checked, it did not look takty at all. So let's do two things. Let's do easy mode and hard mode. Easy mode is going to be to Göteborg, because that is one of the most, that might actually be the most important connection in Spiria. So let's try to do 15th of December and leave at noon. And pretend that the trains are on time, because I did that round trip once for a lark, and in neither side was the train on time. Yeah, okay. Lol tucked. Like, yes, you can see, okay, the train leaves at 11:33 and then 12:33. But before then it's 28. It's 10:28, not 10:33. And then it's 1:29, not 1:33. And here it's frustratingly 2:32, not 2:33. Note that I'm only doing the express one, so the ones that are 3 hours and change, the ones that think that I have infinite time, that I have infinite time, and I'm going to uh and then I'm going to sit on a train for another hour 40 something for a saving of 80 kronor. 80 kronor is about $8, $9. Yeah, no. Uh, 326. Okay, this is clearly a peak thing, maybe with a few extra stops, but it's not in the middle. It is 351. Oh, back to 33. Congratulations. Oh, now they have a special fast train 16. Yeah, like, you see that this is not regular in any way, shape, or form. And this is nuts. This needs to be regular. This needs, like, if they want 33, every train except the intercalating slow ones that I don't quite get where they exist needs to be leaving 33 minutes after the hour every hour. Uh, Compare this with a country where somehow we've had fewer per capita corona deaths than Sweden, at least so far. Uh, Even though there's way more household overcrowding, because we did not have Understegnal try to infect everyone. By the way, if you're wondering what 3G means, if you're not German, uh, oh god, yeah, in German it will tell you exactly what Taxoplan is. So in Germany, because people here want everyone to get corona and die, because if everyone dies, then there's not going to be anyone who will complain that the government is ineffective. So you see, we have 3G. This does not mean 3G phones. It means there are three words that all begin with G because of the G prefix on participles that you can choose between. These are geimpft, which is vaccinated, genesen, which is recovered. In Germany, we're actually pretty good about tracking who has gotten corona and who's recovered from corona. So there are certificates of recovery. And then, so if you can choose one of these two, which is already pretty bad because people hold corona parties for that, it's called 2G. But here, because apparently disease spreaders have an inalienable right to ride the trains, it's 3G. There's a third G, which is getested. So if you take a rapid test day of, it is not a terribly accurate test, uh, then you're good. Um, so anyway, in this country, where despite people's best attempts to infect the entire population, we have not succeeded and doing so as efficiently as Sweden has under Stegnell. I mean, he needs to get some award from, let's say, the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement for his achievement. Let's do Berlin to where? Leipzig, maybe? Hamburg? Hannover? Uh, let's see what happens if I do Hamburg. So, same day, let's say only Bangkok, even though I have a Bangkok, which I'm using a lot less than I thought I would. Okay. So the problem with picking Berlin Hamburg is that it's just more than hourly, so it's gonna look annoying. But 38, 3, 38, 3, 38, 6, 38, 3, 38, 6, 38. Yeah, so the 3 versus 6 thing is being annoying because I think right, because the '06 ones are Eurocity, so I guess these are the ones that come from Prague. Eurocity is international, and then the other ones are just domestic. But the 38 ones, which are the fastest ones, are 38 consistently. And this is something that Germany does way better. Köln-Koblenz, okay, yeah, I can. Yeah, Julio, it's not just a PCR test, at least the 3G place. So I don't know because my acquaintance with the system is not 3Gs because I'm vaccinated, so I don't need to show tests, but 2G pluses, and they will just look and they will just do a rapid test. And the rapid test is just trash at figuring out asymptomatic infection. It's decent at figuring out if you're symptomatic, so I did that when. Why is it that when I put in K, it does not tell me, it does not try the largest city in Germany, which is K. In fact, the city whose one letter acronym is K. Koblenz. Yeah, right, but Koblenz also is also going to be not a high speed train because the high speed trains all go through the new line, right? Right, it's all Regional Express and S-Bahn and Regionalbahn. And you can see that it's a bunch of trains every hour also, so it's not. And specifically trying to show things that are roughly hourly. Because unfortunately, but you see the 32 repeat. So 32 something something 32 something 32. Because there's this kind of tendency, unfortunately. Oh, for the Genesen. Oh, okay, okay. I see what you mean. Yeah. 41, oh, 40, 5601. Okay, so just a bunch of extras. You see it's not regular here when you do regional trains rather than, oh, and again 32. Okay. It's not as regular here when you look at regional trains in conjunction with intercities because they think, oh, it's an hourly tact, whatever. And it's a bunch of hourly, so they do a lot of hourly talks that don't overlay to form something good, which is rather terrible at a thing like Koblenz, which is about an hour. So you probably want, so if it's an hour, you don't just want an hourly talk. You want probably a base half hourly talk without this random 45-minute gap in between. So you probably want to make sure that all of these things are much more regular. This is something that I think Switzerland is pretty good at. I don't have as personal acquaintance with it, so it's possible that I just checked randomly and the things that I checked look okay. But it's, I think, really important. And the Netherlands does this really well, actually. The Netherlands, if you do things like Amsterdam to, I think, to Eindhoven, they will make sure that the trains in various directions actually match correctly so that the tacts overlay to form is very frequent. I think it's every 10 minutes. I think it's a train every 10 minutes, but one train in three requires you to transfer cross platform and it's timed. And so and notice in Germany we don't quite do that yet. So this is something that we need to fix, and I hope that the Deutschlandtakt. I'm hoping for the best and expecting the worst from the Deutschlandtakt on this. But remember, France doesn't even do the hourly talks. In France, it's whatever. In Sweden has pretty good trains. Um, Sweden doesn't have high-speed trains like France because it's a tiny country when it comes to population, not when it comes to size, not when it comes to ego, but when it comes to population, it's tiny. And so they have so they have in Sweden pretty good ridership. I mean and pretty good speed also. The average speed between Stockholm and Göteborg or between Stockholm and Malmö, I think it's about 140 kilometers an hour, right? We thought it was it was 3 hours and change, right? So Western Main Line, that's the one between Stockholm and Göteborg. Oh my God, you're not going to tell me how long this line is? Okay, so let's see, Svenska. Length. Okay, 455 kilometers, and remember that this is a line that was were the fastest trains. They did it in what, 3 hours, 3 minutes, 3 hours six, 3 hours 9. If it's 3 hours 6, it's 147 kilometers an hour. This is on entirely old tracks. This is also with some freight. Uh, this is also with some heavy freight, and this is about the same as the average speed of of most current trains between Berlin and Munich. I think there's a handful of Sprinter that do Berlin München in 4 hours rather than 4 hours 30. So these average 150 something rather than 140 something. But this is a line on which Germany spent 10 billion euros on various bypasses and a lot of tunneling between Thüringen and Bayern. Yeah, a lot of it comes from RRX, but Koblenz, Koblenz is not Rhein-Ruhr. Koblenz currently is fully intercity. Um, but anyway, the point is that so note that when I'm saying Sweden needs to learn the German talk, I'm not saying Sweden sucks. There are things in Sweden that suck. For example, the fact that Anders Tegnell has not been prosecuted and imprisoned for mass manslaughter. However, or the fact that they have insanely high sexual assault rates and they don't know how to deal with that because they think that sexual assault equals people of color and people of color equal sexual assault. But when it comes to infrastructure, they're not terrible. They actually have, their construction costs are not as low as they were 15 or 20 years ago. Don't get me wrong. They have problems, but they're still doing a lot better than Germany, for example, a lot better than France. Ooh, that's nice. Um, And so but still, I'm pointing out that even in a rather frontiery place like Sweden, where they're doing really nice things with their infrastructure, um, they still need to figure out tax timetables, which unfortunately they have not done so yet. And this is even though they do have decent transfer timing. So, no, I don't want your cookies. Um, yeah. So, there's 302 even, but mostly it's 303, I guess. 306. Yeah. So the average. This is a line, again. This is a line that's 455 kilometers. It's 303. Yeah, 149. It might actually be the world record for a line that's not high-speed rail but is legacy. Because I think Britain hits 160 if you gerrymander to not do London to a big city, but London to a city that's at a specific junction. Like I think London Preston might hit that, or London to I think Doncaster, because to York because there's a little bit of slowdown around York and then Leeds even more so on the East Coast Main Line. And so again, they're doing really nice things with their infrastructure because they can't just build high-speed rail like they're France, because they're not France, because the entire population of Sweden is at this point maybe 11 million, so about the same as Ile-de-France. They can, and it's not Belgium or the Netherlands also don't really have high-speed rail, but probably should. Which are like Belgium, yeah, Belgium is 12.5 million people here. Sweden is 11 million people here. And it's not like all of the country is empty and it's all in like one tiny place. It's not Canada. Yeah, this place is pretty empty, but even this area, so without Norman, um, not Norman, Norman is a neighborhood without what's it called? Norland. Without Norland. This is, I don't know, 9-ish million people. Again, 9 million people, 12.5 million. So as you can tell, Sweden can't just splurge on infrastructure. They don't have the density. Um, and this is something that I've been blogging about for a while. So because I know it's been used as a canard by rail opponents in the United States who say that the United States does not have enough density. And then people say, well, you don't need density or something. Density is not density. Both sides are bullshit. Density in the context of intercity rail, that's not something you can learn. It's just where your country is. Density is a question of how big your cities or more precisely, how far away they are from each other. So in Sweden, so here's what it means that Sweden is a low density country. It means that, remember, it's 455 kilometers on the railway between Stockholm and Göteborg. It's maybe 400 by direct line that passes through the middle of various lakes. And what's in between? So Stockholm is 2.5 million people. Göteborg is about 1 million. In between, what do you have? You have Örebro. Like, nobody lives in Örebro. They're trying to build a high-speed line right now. That's going to be one trunk for both going to Göteborg and for going to Malmö. So that's going to pass through Linköping and Jönköping. Linköping, the city of Linköping is about 100,000 people. I don't even think they define a metropolitan area. I think they only define metropolitan areas for Stockholm, Göteborg, and Malmö. And so there's essentially nothing there's nothing that's recognizably urban between Stockholm and Göteborg. And yes, Linköping is a city with a university, but I mean, no, just no. Okay, I mean, there are small cities out there like Leipzig. Linköping is a lot smaller than, for example, Leipzig. So it means that you don't get as much maybe ridership because there aren't as many people on this piece of infrastructure you're building. So it's Lech and Lech, and yeah, sure, you're serving the major cities of Sweden. There's just not a lot of people. This is what it means that you're low density in Sweden. Conversely, in Germany, we have high density. What does this mean? It means that we can start stringing lines, and without even attempting, because Germany has never attempted to build a coherent high-speed rail network, because that would make the country too French or something. What we're doing is, okay, we have this Rhine-Ruhr network, which is a lot of different centers, and in this area live about 11 million people. I'm just drawing through the cores, so that would be Köln, Düsseldorf, Duisburg, Essen, Dortmund, maybe Bonn here if you care. And then maybe a bunch of things are in the number of these. I think it goes as far east as I think Hamm. It's kind of the eastern end of this region, the northeastern end of this region, and then you have things, and then the western end would be not quite the border, but close to it. Like Mönchengladbach is an old mining town, I believe. I don't think Aachen is ever considered part of the Rhine-Ruhr. So Mönchengladbach is, however. Düren, I have no idea. Bonn is generally the southern end. So this is about 11 million people, and it's not in one city or anything. There's no way in which this is one urban core. This is many urban cores, but it's pretty compact. So when you're building, let's say, a fast train from Dortmund to point East, that hits everything here. And then let's say we're going east to Berlin. Remember, we have high density in Germany, so it means that in between, you pass by Bielefeld. Okay, so you pass by Bielefeld, which is not a large city, but I mean so Bielefeld is a city that everyone in Germany jokes does not exist, because the idea is that it's so small nobody's ever been there, and then the few people who say that have been there are just lying and part of the conspiracy. 333.5 thousand people live in there. Linköping is 104,000. And if they define a metro area, which I do not even know how, it's 159,000. So this is, and there's a lot of, and Bielefeld again is by German standards so small, people pretend it does not exist. And then Hannover, this is a metro area of 1.2. There are 3 subway lines through the middle of Hannover. So 3 Stadtbahn trunks. I believe the total ridership on the Hannover Stadtbahn is 170 million a year. Göteborg, I think, is only 100 million on the straight line. And now let's keep going. We're going to skip Brunswick because the main line does not pass through it. There's Wolfsburg. This is where the main Volkswagen headquarters and factories are. Then we're going to skip Magdeburg and Brandenburg again because the line skips them. And we're entering Berlin. So this is just the line itself. This is without the things that it connects to. Because you absolutely can change trains at Hannover and go to Bremen or go to Hamburg. Whereas we're gonna change train if we're doing Stockholm to Göteborg. What are you gonna change trains in Göteborg for? Like what exactly? I mean, for Fredrikstad, no. You can go down the coast maybe, but then you would just go direct to Malmö. You go sufficiently far up the coast, you go to Oslo, but then you just use the same line, like part of the same line to do Stockholm to Oslo. And this is not a fast line. Unfortunately, as I said in the last week, there's not a lot of investment here, unfortunately, in international high-speed rail. There should be more. So this is what it means that Germany is a higher density country than Sweden, which means that in Germany, we can, by accident, get a pretty decent intercity rail system because you create together various segments that you're building from Berlin to Hanover, you upgrade something from Hamburg to Hanover which is not even intended as high-speed rail, but that is a bypass of East Germany for north-south traffic. And maybe you build a few high-speed bypasses when lines become critically, when they become critically endangered, like when they become critically endangered, critically overloaded, like on the Rhine, or between Frankfurt and Mannheim, that they're about to build a new line. And suddenly, okay, we have a high-speed line from Köln to Frankfurt, and we have one from Mannheim to Stuttgart, and we're about to have one from Frankfurt to Mannheim, and one from Stuttgart to Ulm, and I think we're also thinking about Ulm to Augsburg, and just through accretion of random things, without seriously trying, we're about to get a high-speed, mostly high-speed trunk line that goes from Köln almost all the way to München. Yeah, it's going to be slow from München to Augsburg, but I mean, this is not a crawl, right? This is annoying slow intercity speed, but it's not, I mean, these 60 kilometers are not going to take hours, right? These 60 kilometers where high speed rail would be 15 minutes, and instead they're probably 30. So not the end of the world. And likewise, up the Rhine, not as fast, but decently fast from up to Karlsruhe, and then Freiburg, and then Basel. All of this is through recreation. None of this is a coordinated high-speed rail system in any way, shape, or form because Germany needs to learn that from France and has not done so yet. Just as France needs to learn how to timetable things regularly and not act like a ground level airline in which they're even trying to. I don't know if they're doing security on the trains in France. I know in Spain they do. I know they have on Eurostar with lines that were designed by people who either know nothing about trains or hate the passengers. Or I'm thinking about a sleeper dark horse option, which is both. So the situation on Eurostar is that you have a bunch of lines like it's an airport. So a separate line for passport control, because even when it was in the EU, Britain did not join Schengen, because then Priti Patel would not have been able to capture immigrants with nets or something. And by the way, when I say immigrants, don't think of like mass migration. Think of a couple tens of thousands of people who, if they just entered, nobody would notice. And then a separate line for security, and then a separate line for a secondary check to get from the waiting area as if it's an airline to the platform. And then they still do ticket checks on the train. They don't even do it the way that they sometimes do on low cost TGVs, where they make you queue on the platform for a ticket check. But that's so they can cut conductors and attempt. They say attempt, they're not successfully doing so, to cut operating costs, like with onboard crew. So it's the worst of all worlds, Eurostar, as I mentioned in the previous week's video about international trains. And and I think some of that is also starting to reflect on domestic TGVs because again, Parisian elite goes to London. Uh, and so the situation is that and so I think they're trying to do gates on the platforms as opposed to full security theater or anything. But that's something you need to not do unless you're just cutting conductors. If you're running without conductors or with very few conductors, like how the Shinkansen runs. So I didn't talk about operating costs. The Shinkansen runs a 16-car train with three conductors. One driver, three conductors. TGV, normally it's a train of the same length, somewhat fewer seats. One driver, I believe, eight conductors, and I think two cafe train attendants. I think the cheap trains, I think the WeGo trains are supposed to be four conductors in lieu of eight, and maybe no cafe cars, I forgot. Um, but still, more than Shinkansen. Um, I don't know how many conductors they have on trains in Germany. I think it's three per 8-car train. Amtrak, I think it's three per 8-car train. So ask yourself if you want to be in this company. And the operating costs matter. Uh, so in the same way that with metros, you won't want to cut operating costs through using driverless tech. Uh, so you're cutting construction costs by using smaller trains, but also you're cutting operating costs. The operating costs of these driverless trains are very low, and people need to adopt that, i.e., build all new lines that are not extensions of existing lines, fully driverless, and start getting to work on converting existing lines that are not driverless to driverless. In France, it would be especially good to convert everything. I think at this point they're starting to convert everything except Paris, which is the most important, because they don't want the drivers to keep going on strike. Except in Paris, that's the worst because driverless conversion rates, the not the rates, the conversion costs, they're based on state number of stations, length of line, number of train sets, but the benefits are based on how many trains you're running. So you want to be more driverless on lines that are busier, which is also the uh, prioritization they're doing in Paris. So line one, then line four, now line 13. Um, but they're not doing it system wide for some reason. So that's again something that they should be learning. Kind of weird because it's very unusual to convert a line from manual to driverless. Nuremberg has done this. Paris has done it. I don't know if anyone else has, but they need to think about it in Paris. To think about doing this a lot more. London, same thing. London is barely even a frontier city. I mean, some of the operations things are nice, but a lot of their capital things are so broken that no, it's just not. Um, so we've talked about things like timed overtakes, time connections, the existence of high-speed rail, i.e. France, Spain, Germany. Sweden also, but I can understand why. Again, low density, it's difficult for them to do this. In Germany, it's so easy, it's almost happening by accident. They just need to do a few final connections, which are going to cost a couple 10 billion euros, I think 30, optimistically 50 pessimistically, and that gets Germany high speed rail network, very fast. Supports very high frequency, connecting all of the major cities. I think the largest city in Germany that would not be connected to the network would be, I want to say, Münster might be the largest, and it would have regional connections to various stations here where people can connect. Um, and so the maybe Rostock actually, but same thing. And so what else? Metro construction. It's really important to understand what Madrid did, but don't slavishly imitate Madrid when if other low-cost countries have done the same, if done other things. So Madrid specifically rejected building driverless trains 25 years ago on the grounds that it's expensive and tested tech. Italy went ahead and built driverless trains, which has helped it reduce costs. Um, Spain has been doing marvelous things, and most everything you want to copy it when it comes to construction, maybe not operations. But on the driverless trains, I think they goofed, and people should be more like Milan or Turin or Brescia when they're building new lines. And I hope that Spain recognizes it and amends its errors and starts building driverless trains in the future. It's going to be especially important because Madrid might actually be tapped out. I'm not sure, but especially when they're building in smaller cities, they don't need huge trains. So if they're building more lines in places like in a place like Valencia or Sevilla, then they should be thinking about smaller trains or Bilbao. Um, what else? We were talking a lot about I talked about time things and scheduling before. Construction methods. You want to figure out ways to disempower NIMBYs. Germany is kind of the NIMBY capital of Europe, regrettably. Again, it's what I call antisocial middle class behavior. So, constant lawsuits, constant I know better type thinking from retired engineers who think that what was good for their grandfather, again, do not ask where said grandfather got his necklace, what is good for them as well. Uh, in France, a lot of it is airline brain that needs to learn from like places that are not airline brain, like Japan, like Germany. Um, what else? So I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that Europe is better than Asia at how a station looks, because in Asia they try to make stations too fancy, and this makes the station, and it means that the stations have too big a footprint, whereas here they're better at shrinking the footprint. And I don't just mean in the sense of station length. I mean like even relative to platform length. I think it matters. Um, Another thing we do better than Asia, that is the definite Europe versus Asia difference, is high-speed rail. Do you build it? How do you build it when it's not? How do you build it when it's not in tunnel? So Asia likes building shallow grades because Japan, when it was building in the 50s, didn't even figure out that high-speed trains running EMUs can climb very steep grades, so they built shallow grades, 2%, and since they've cut down to 1.5% in newer lines, and most of their construction in the last, I think, 40 years, the parts that are not in tunnel are elevated, and this has been copied elsewhere in Asia. This is bad. China, because of that, has high construction costs relative to how little tunneling it needs, because China is kind of flat. I mean, it's not as flat as a bunch of not very smart geographic determinists think. So this specific area is incredibly flat. Uh, this line, Beijing to Shanghai, is called the world's longest L or something like that. I think it's about 1.3 thousand kilometers. I believe about 1% of that in tunnel, but most of the rest is elevated. Um, and that has led to higher construction costs. And I'd say geographic Germans, there are certain people who will tell you lousy things about Asian culture that come from the claim that China is flat and Europe is mountainous, because see me, I think you can see the elevation, uh, right? Because I mean, see how far up I can do. So I go here roughly, and that's where my face is. Yeah, you're seeing the elevation. See here, does it look flat? Look southeast. This is the southern, more than half of China. Um, and yeah, Chinese civilization formed uh, here and not here, but for the last 1,000+ years, the majority of China has lived. Uh, so I just point this out because there are certain morons who think that a civilization with this uh, topography will inherently be somewhat more centralized or something, or less mountainous than a civilization with, again, you can see the same elevation, this topography, North European plain. Um, Again, there are smarter arguments about differences between Europe and China coming from geography, and specifically talking about the one that says China is flat. No, Beijing or Shanghai is flat. China is not flat. Um, and anyway, so the point is that in Europe, instead of doing this over viaducting thing, except in Italy, which notably Italy builds mostly elevated high-speed lines. They're built to potentially carry freight, even though they don't. I think they might also have gentle grades, although that doesn't really matter given how flat this is. Like Italy is in a weird flat position where the grades won't matter terribly for how much tunneling you need because it doesn't have rolling terrain enough. Because this is flat, so it doesn't so there's not going to be tunneling either way, and this is too mountainous, so it's going to be tunnels either way. At any rate, in Italy, they actually have pretty high-speed rail construction costs. And this is, again, a country with very low infrastructure and construction costs in general. So they're doing something wrong with their high-speed rail. So not in the sense that it's wrong to build it. They should be building it. It's a good thing. They maybe aren't running it amazingly well, but the construction is fine, and the ridership per capita is way better than Spain, and worse than France, but not that much worse than France at this point, I don't think. And so but in the rest of Europe, what they do is, first of all, the grades are often steeper. Again, Germany is the one that wants freight-friendly grades for stupid reasons, but in France and Spain and parts of Germany, France, even without EMUs, they figured wait the slack. Yes, these are trains with power cars, but the power cars run, at the time they were doing it, 260 kilometers an hour. Now they're going to be 300 or 320. So we can just build steep grades, and yeah, the train's going to lose a little bit of momentum going uphill, but it's not going to lose a lot of momentum going uphill. If the train's going to slow down from 260 to 250, that's not going to be, and then speed back up, that's not a big deal. Now, if the train were going 100, it will not slow down from 100 to 90, because gravity is a time-based thing, right? It's meters per second squared, not meters per length, and so if gravity is slowing you from 260 to 250, then the same gravity would not slow you from 100 to 90, right? Because from 100, the gravity would have 2.6 times as much time to slow you down. So it's actually going to slow you down from 100, I guess, to 75, and that's a pretty big hit to speed. Whereas in so for legacy lines, especially before electrification, they avoided high grades. Or if they did, they had to attach helper locomotives in the United States or something. But high-speed trains, whatever, 3.5%, that's normal. That's the standard. This is how Paris to Lyon is zero tunnel. The other lines in France are not zero tunnel, but most of them are very close to zero tunnel, and the one that can't be, which is Marseille to Nice, is the one that's so expensive they're downgrading it to a mix of high and low speed running. Spain, same thing. It uses steeper grades, I believe. Germany, some lines do that, like going to Frankfurt. Some don't, like the various slogfests that are mixed passenger freight or think they're going to be mixed passenger freight. But in any way, even in Germany, something really important. If a line is not underground and it is not currently crossing a river, it is at grade. It is not on a viaduct. It is going to be on earthworks, not even very tall earthworks. And this is very important because it means because cut and fill is cheaper than concrete viaducts. It's more land intensive, but don't forget, land in Germany is a high density country. The population density in Germany is almost as high as in Japan. The value of agriculture here isn't materially lower than in East Asia. So yes, you're taking a little bit more farmland, but you're not actually taking a lot of farmland, objectively speaking. So this is really important to understand that this is how you should be building high-speed rail, because this is one of very rare things where there is a Europe versus Asia difference, and Europe is better when it comes to high-speed rail construction standards and costs. Now, there are also things that don't go this way. when it comes to rolling stock, for example, Europe is better in the medium speed range. So regional trains, let's say you go 100, regional trains that run, let's say between 130 and 200 are better in Europe. High-speed trains that go, let's say 250 plus, certainly 300 plus, Japan just murders everyone else. And I think that China is also generally better than Europe. Uh, Trains that go less than 130, again, Japan murders everyone else because in Japan they figured that the trains don't need to weigh too much, so the trains in Japan are very light. They don't try to make them crash worthy, they try to avoid crashes. Japan has some catastrophic accidents, but so does Europe, so does the United States, so does China. I mean, per passenger kilometer, Japan is safer by a lot than Europe. And of course, Europe is way safer than the United States. Again, I'm talking about frontier countries, I'm not talking about um, countries with infrastructure that I don't want to call it third world, but I will say that Morocco has better high speed. Morocco at this point has better intercity trains than the United States. Um, so that's so these are some examples of what countries can learn from each other. Again, all of this is very train related. I will maybe conclude by talking about development because I think you need to talk about development. Um, and again, it just scrambles everything. So with development, this is something that generally Asia does better, but there are important details. So there's variation within Asia and within Europe. Development, you want to follow the first things. First, this is the following rules. First of all, housing needs to be abundant, so just allow more of it. Second, in a modern transit-oriented city, development needs to follow. So, in addition to being abundant, it needs to have two important things. The first, and both of them are hierarchical, and both of them kind of offend people with very traditionalist views of cities. The first is that you want jobs to concentrate near city center. This is something that Europe thinks is bad because they think the United States does this, even though the United States, in fact, has very large levels of job dispersal. Yes, a few skyscrapers in the city center, but beyond the central square kilometer, it's nothing. Like even at the level, I mean, at the level of 100 square kilometers, Paris, which includes that level also La Défense, is 37% of Ile-de-France jobs. I do not know the numbers for Germany. I've asked for them many times. I've never gotten them. So it's 37% in Paris, maybe 35% in New York, maybe about the same, maybe a little less in Boston and San Francisco, much less anywhere else in America. I mean, it can be low 20s and the Sun Belt is in the teens. So you need job concentration. It doesn't mean job concentration within 5 skyscrapers, like you're some small American city that thinks it's a large American city, but you definitely want to have a large city center. You want to permit it to commercialize, which means that if you have residential neighborhoods near the center, it should be easy to commercialize them with more retail and more office space. This is really important. It's something that the United States, by the way, is awful at. They have single family residential zoning sometimes within walking distance from city center. So this is something that Europe does well, commercialization, and also Asia. But Europe kind of resists the idea of the high-rise central business district. So you actually get better job concentration in big Asian cities. So Singapore is an honorable mention, even though it's southeast and not east. Actually, southeast is pretty good at it as well. Hell, Dubai does that. But lots of Tokyo is very good. Osaka, Seoul, Taipei. Taipei has a lot less housing, but there's a very strong city center. One that's actually pretty large because there are a bunch of central districts in Taipei. So, for example, the place where you think of as the city center of Taipei is not where the Taipei 101 is, for example. So essentially, all of this is the center of Taipei. So, so the train station is here. This is still part of city center, and the 101 is around here, I think. So it's a bunch of different central districts, all very high density. Shanghai is also very good. I have no idea about Beijing. Um, and again, Europe is just worse at this because of aesthetic things. That's the first thing that offends traditionalists is you need a high-rate city center for because job concentration is good. The opposite of job concentration is not some kind of old-timey neighborhood things, although they do reproduce some of the worst effects of tradition. It's job sprawl and people just driving to office parks. That's the first thing. The second thing is that residential development, so that's going to be outside city center, but quite close to city center perhaps, uh, should not be uniform. So what I mean by uniform is let's look at Berlin. It was a very large city 100 years ago, so it has the best development of 100 years ago. Um, okay, so I'm just going to zoom on random places. This is Pankow slash Bratislava. You can kind of see that the buildings are all basically the same density throughout this area. Yeah, maybe here's a remove the wing. Maybe this actually might be a calling block. This I can't tell. Um, these are probably not calling blocks. These probably just have the wings removed. Do you see the wings here? Like the internal things. Um, they were very unpopular because you couldn't touch grass. So they removed them from a bunch of places, leading to larger courtyards. But fundamentally, it's rather uniform density all over this area. And again, it's a very inner area. It's a very desirable area, Glenn Uh, and so again, very uniform density. And again, this is how people thought of how to build cities 100 years ago, and that's how Berlin looked. And there are a lot of urbanists who want to reproduce that and get mad when developers don't spontaneously do that, because here's how a modern city looks. Let's do Tokyo and not Taipei for a sec. Um, and let's go to, I mean, I've never been to any of these places. Taipei I've been to. Let's not do Shibuya, which is kind of, let's do Shibuya, but not the commercial center of Shibuya. So I'd like people to see something, which is that when we go to the more residential parts here, uh, and again, all of this is um, yeah, all of this is Shibuya until you hit, I guess you hit Suginami and stuff like that here. Um, can you see that you have just much more? So first of all, we don't have the they don't have the courtyard. Which I mean, fine, it's stylistic. But more importantly, can you see that the density is not uniform? So over here, this is a random place, not near any train station. These are fucking houses. I mean, townhouses, sure, and some of them are apartment buildings, and some of them are small apartment buildings. But can you tell that in here in Tokyo, they have three-story apartment buildings and a parking lot? This looks like 2 stories, 2 stories, 2 stories, a bunch of townhouses. Um, and again, this is a randomly chosen, totally random, non near the railway part of Tokyo, and then let's go near the railway. Um, can you see that the buildings here get bigger? Yeah, this is what I mean by non-uniform density. And maybe here the gradient is gentler. There are places where so if it's not a randomly selected residential train station, I think in Ueno you can get to places where the density drops from literal skyscrapers to single family housing within walking distance. Um, and like this, and like generally in Taito is very good at this because Taito is not a very rich area, so not a lot of redevelopment potential unless you're right next to a train station. And so it's just so there's a bigger gradient in density, which is what you would expect in a place with abundant housing, and Tokyo has abundant housing. Um, why would a developer build tall here? like randomly selected part of title, which is, to be very clear, possibly it might actually be the poorest ward of Tokyo that has the Yamanote line passing through it. And then if you look at the ones that are beyond Yamanote, like things here and here, yeah, I mean, why would, if I'm a developer, why would I build? I mean, if I'm near a train station, yeah, definitely, that's a short commute. Why would I build 10 minutes 10 minutes on foot from the train station when I can build 3 minutes on foot from the train station? And if I'm running out of the space here, I'm building 3 minutes on foot from the next train station. But this is essentially how it works when the city is developing around rapid transit. In this case, it would be a railway network, or could equally be a subway network. The only reason it might look like this in cities that did develop around a subway, like Berlin or New York or Paris, is that historically such cities, first of all, the subways in all of these places had very short interstations. Paris, among the major metros of the world, has the shortest interstation. New York on the local trains, I think, might be number 2, and I think Berlin might be number 3. So very short station spacing, and also maybe 100 years ago, it was too expensive to build things with elevators for the working class. So so once they ran out of space near the station for 6-story or 7-story tenement building in New York, they would build more 7-story tenements a little farther away until the entire, let's say, Upper West Side or West Harlem would be filled with these kinds of tenements. So it's just less. So that way there was less of a gradient. But if you build now, it's not a big deal to build 20 stories. There's normally going to be a gradient, like what we just saw in Tokyo, like what we can see in Taipei. Same thing. And this is development that needs to be legalized, and unfortunately, Europe is really bad at legalizing this. So this is kind of the level of urban design. But the important thing is that you want to have more density near train stations than farther away from train stations. This is a key design principle of TOD, transit-oriented development. Some places are very good at it. Again, Taipei is very good. Taipei is also a developed country that does not want to die of a fatal disease. But let's look, for example, at an otherwise developed city that does want to die from a fatal disease. So let's not look at central Stockholm, right? Because all this is stuff that developed 100 plus years ago. I mean, I lived very northern edge of central Stockholm. I lived, I don't remember where, and so I lived in a wing, but I'm forgetting in which of these buildings did I live. I think maybe here, maybe the farthest out. This is, again, this was the farthest north reach centrally of central Stockholm, unless you count very clearly more recently built university, and this is and the building that's, I think, 1908, maybe 1907. So this was not TOD. This was pre-TOD. This was maybe TOD when transit was streetcars or walking-oriented development. So let's look at actual TOD. Now, Sweden was amazing at it because it happened to be building the subway 50s, 60s, 70s, same time that it was building the public housing, the Million program, where it literally built 1 million housing units in a country that at the time had about 8 million people in 10 years. So these are usually hated for their dreary modernism, and there are people who think that this is somehow the first cause of all of Sweden's social problems, the ones that cannot be blamed on immigrants. But I mean, it's housing. It's actually pretty abundant, it's just not abundant in city center. I mean, but if you're willing to go to suburbs that are far from jobs, knock yourself dead. By which I mean you will get corona and beat that. So I'm just showing you. Mostly I'm trying to remember where all the subway lines are because for some reason it's not showing this to me. But I'm pretty sure I can actually figure out where the subway lines are just by where the centers of all these towns are. So this is not the subway line. This is the commuter line. But oh, okay, here's a good one. Liljeholmen. There's a subway station here. It's not being, yeah, okay, here. Liljeholmen. This is, I believe, the branch point on the south side of the red line. And you kind of see there's a center here. There's a very distinct neighborhood center here. And then farther out, it's less central. And then here it would be, I think here it's a light rail line at this point. Tverbanen, right? Yeah. It's a weird circumferential triangle. You can kind of see, I mean, near the center, it's relatively near the station, and then farther away from the station, it's undeveloped. If for some reason there were a subway station here, this would not look like this. This would look like this. And again, you can kind of see this, and this is, and I say Sweden. Sweden's not the only one. Copenhagen did the same thing with commuter rail. It's something called the finger plan. And again, same thing. I mean, you can see near the main street where you might have buses, big buildings. Near the subway station, big buildings. Uh, and then farther away, it's parkland. Uh, because the because why would you be building very densely, let's say here, far from transportation arteries, when you could just build more on the next station over because you're oriented around transit. So this is how, so Stockholm did this amazingly well. This is not easy to replicate in not Stockholm because the because it comes specifically from the era of the Mail-in program. But I mean, nowadays people realize, oh shit, there's a lot of demand to live in the city, so let's build more market rate housing in or near city center. And some places do it well. Paris is doing it decently well. Stockholm again. German cities aren't. Again, we're very NIMBY, unfortunately. Say we. I mean, I wouldn't say we, but I also voted for a very NIMBY party in Berlin, hoping that I'd at least be able to knock Francisco Giffey off of the mayoral spot. I failed, but the Greens and Die Linke did get the NIMBYism bit into the coalition agreement. But the so notice it's very oriented around transit, and the result is that the model split for I think all trips in Stockholm County for public transit is maybe 40% or 42%. And if you try to figure out how to assign just for trips because it's for comparability purposes, you're I think mid 40s. So Stockholm might actually be beating Paris, or if it's not, it's very close. In Paris, it's 12 million people, or maybe 13 million people at this point. In Stockholm, it's 2.5. Like Stockholm is almost even with Seoul and Tokyo. And again in Paris, and like let's compare the size of Stockholm with the size of Seoul and Tokyo, or even with the size of Paris. This is something that Sweden did very well, and other places should be copying that. Places that are thinking of building a lot of housing, which could be private or public. You do not need to do this as a purely public system. You can do it through zoning, through high density zoning within, I don't know, 300 or 500 meters of a subway station, and then not worry about developing places that are, I don't know, a kilometer plus from a subway station. But this is something that NIMBY places should be copying as well, because you need to integrate development with public transportation. It is something. I mean, development is always integrated with transportation. It's just that it's much more important to do it to get it right when it's public transportation. It's much less spontaneous. It's much harder to accrete this is get something good, unlike with cars, or unlike with I don't know street cars of 130 years ago. And yeah, so this is a good example. Eastern Europe actually has a bunch of good commie examples, where you can see all the commie blocks right next to all the subway stops that were being built outside city center. Or the tramways, same thing. So Warsaw, for example, has pretty good transit system because of this kind of transit orientation. And then places that maybe didn't do that, like the entirety, like polycentric regions, like Silesia, it's actually they don't have this kind of organizational structure, so anyone can drive drives. Which is again very different from Warsaw, very different from Prague, or Budapest. That's kind of the last important thing is you need to integrate development into all of this, and here the best places are generally democratic East Asia. I say democratic because China has problems. Hong Kong even more. Hong Kong is very NIMBY. It builds too little essentially. I mean, what it builds is near the MTR, but it builds too little, and that leads to too much overcrowding. Singapore, nobody even knows how much it costs to build all these HDB blocks because it's a state secret. And within Europe, Stockholm is decent, although Stockholm does need way more high rises, residential and commercial, in city center. Paris is decent, again, in the suburbs, not the city itself, which needs a lot of redevelopment. And Germany is very bad. Southern Europe, I cannot tell because Southern Europe, my understanding is that they're TODing when they need to, but the demand is kind of weak, so it's hard to tell whether uh, whether they can just fill demand with levels of construction that are not offensive to traditionalists, or whether if the Italian economy, let me see if Italian economy in a nutshell. So these numbers are inflation adjusted, I believe. So it's not that. So I'm pretty sure it does not mean that the nominal level of productivity in Italy has not changed in 20 years. It's, I believe, the real level, but still zero productivity growth in 20 years. The United States and Italy were basically even 20 years ago. The UK was basically even with them. Germany and France were actually a little ahead of the United States 20 years ago, and they're not anymore. Sweden, again, all of these places were basically the same. The UK may be a little behind 20 years ago, and then look what happened to Italy. And what happened to France and Germany, and even more so to the United States. Now, if Italy catches up like this, then yeah, it's going to have more housing demand, because maybe there's going to be more urban economy. Italians are going to get richer, and maybe they're going to not want to live with their parents until they get married. There's going to be more immigration. So again, I don't know if Italy is actually going to be able to do that. Italy, I believe, is very traditionalist about its housing, so it's not going to like find a place in Bologna that is not actually historically important and build a 50-story tower there. That's not how they roll. Even in Milan, where the city center has been rebuilt a couple times, they're not going to do that. So I don't know about whether Southern Europe is capable of being EMBR. Again, Italy is kind of weird because for historic reasons. I don't know if Spain is going to be capable of doing that. I do not know. France has that demand and it's kind of weak. At building in city center, it's building a lot in the inner suburbs, near where the metro goes, near where they're building Grand Paris Express. But and they actually build housing in a fair amount of abundance, but not in the city, unfortunately. So yeah, that's the development connections, and it's been 2.5 hours. I think I will stop here and I will take questions if anyone has any. You know, I'm gonna see if there's a way that I can silence the fan. What about trams? Depends on city size. Um, if you're Tokyo and or Osaka or maybe Nagoya, I don't think you have any reason to look at them. Um, the point of trams is that they're lower cost, lower capacity than normal metros. Um, and and lower speed than normal metros. Berlin does not. I mean, Berlin overly invests in trams nowadays because of the green idea that subways are a conspiracy to create more space on the street for cars, so trams are more moral. and this is a big problem. Um, so what they should be doing. So I know that Korea, for example, has a little bit of that, but Korea's investment still. So because Korea does everything, it's a little bit like Japan, which does a lot of weird tech, like um, hanging monorails or the Rinimo in Nagoya. But the dominant investment in Korea is still the metro and the regional rail tunnel and not the tram. And this is what it should be for a very large city. Um, Again, if it's, let's say, a connection, so in Taipei, actually, they're doing a bunch of nice light rail things in very peripheral areas that are just going to connect to a subway station, where just a branch of the subway will not work well, or an extension of the subway will not work well. Um, but for cities that are above the size class of, let's say, Leipzig, you want a metro-based system. Maybe you want a Stadtbahn, but you should not build a Stadtbahn spontaneously. So Tel Aviv is building a Stadtbahn spontaneously. By spontaneously, I mean from scratch, as opposed to the historic ways that Stadtbahns have been built in both Germany and the United States, or and Belgium. Okay, it's more than two things, so it's not both. In Germany, the United States, Belgium, and I guess also the Netherlands, which is a tramway network, pre-existed. Central parts of the network get buried in a trunk line, um, like as in Boston, Philadelphia. Then generations later in Köln, and in Frankfurt, Stuttgart, San Francisco, Hannover, Essen, Dortmund, Brussels. Um, Forgetting whether Amsterdam's history is like that, but Rotterdam's is, I believe. So, so if you don't already have streetcars, I don't think you should be probably building a Stadtbahn. Tel Aviv is doing that, but I think Tel Aviv is wrong. I think Tel Aviv is making an error, and I think Tel Aviv understands that it's making an error because it needs more capacity. So even as they're building this Stadtbahn, they're planning on a three-line driverless metro system. Does that answer your question? Because I don't think that Japan needs to be copying the light rail revival. Again, not on large cities, maybe in Sendai, sure, but um, in the long run, Sendai is just a place where people are moving to Tokyo from. So, oh, what do you mean other places? Like again, you mean the size class of Hiroshima, of Sendai, places like that? Then maybe, I guess. I mean, I know Hiroshima has a big streetcar network, right? Oh, Utsunomiya, yeah. I mean, I guess. Um, I mean, also, I mean, Utsunomiya is essentially at this point a commuter suburb of Tokyo, right? Because the Utsunomiya line actually gets there, and there's Shinkansen as well. So, I imagine a lot of things would be just about how to serve, about how to hit the train station. Because if you do that, then maybe I can see a Stadtbahn work, maybe. Um, if you have existing tram systems, then maybe. But we're looking at a Stadtbahn again in a place like Utsunomiya, just because in Utsunomiya, it's important to serve the train station for the connections to Tokyo. Uh, that might be a good test case for that if there's already something. But I would not build a Stadtbahn de novo in a place like Utsunomiya. I mean, hell, I mean, if you want to copy something from Europe at that scale, why not bikes? I mean, the person I know in Leipzig doesn't, I think, doesn't normally even have a tram, and doesn't normally have a tram bus, I don't think, because they just bike to work. Does that actually comport with like anything about the actual experience in autonomy? But which the only thing that I know is that it's a city north of Tokyo that has been captured kind of as kind of a suburb, but oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah, but do they do? Yeah, but is it, for example, like, is it convenient to, let's say, bike in Utsunomiya if you're going anywhere? Like, if you're like, I do not know to what extent it's bikeable to get to the factories. Um, the cyclists here are generally not factory workers. Um, huh? How come? Is it because of the because industrial workers drive, or is it because it's or is it because of the suburb, or is it because people, I don't know, do they park and ride to Tokyo or something? Huh. Oh, okay, yeah. That's a very problem. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and in Utsunomiya's case, I don't know. I mean, Leipzig, for example, is a very bike and tram type city, but first of all, it's trad trams, not new trams. Second, uh, the industrial jobs are not in Leipzig. The industrial jobs in Saxony are in not Leipzig, and the people who either work at these jobs or wish they work at these jobs think that bikes are the moral equivalent of a second Holocaust, with one important difference, which is that they think a second Holocaust would actually be okay, unlike bikes. By the way, are there questions? Oh, thanks, Juan. Are there other questions? I'm gonna give it like, I don't know. Let's make it 9:50 for the timing. Something here bothers me about the recording timing because I know I started exactly nine. It's exactly 19:00, and this looks like it's lagging by about a minute, and I do not know why. Yeah. So this looks like I started 1902, but I started 1900. I cannot tell what's wrong with this. It dropped frames or something. I don't know. Anyway, if there aren't any more questions, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying with me, even though I was late. And I will see you in a week with another video about a topic to be. Let's say to be a topic TBD. So